Okay, today we're going to look at nation building in Latin America. This is what you guys have been working on for the last few days, and we're just going to go through some of the highlights of this section. Okay, due to changes that have been going on in the United States, especially with the American Revolution, some of those ideas began to move down towards Latin America. Of course, if you look at this map, you can see the colonies of Latin America in the 1800s and the colonies in 18 or the lack of colonies in 1830. You can look at both maps and get an idea of what European countries were controlling Latin America. European countries like the British, the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, and the Spanish. Social class structure had been developed during this colonial period in Latin America. At the top of the social class structure was a group known as the Peninsulares. The Peninsulares were Spanish and Portuguese nationals who lived temporarily in Latin America for political or economic gain. Usually, these guys were guys that were very powerful and usually very wealthy. They didn't necessarily live in Latin America, but they would go back and forth between Europe and Latin America. The next group were the Creoles. The Creoles were people who were permanent residents that held land and who were descendants of Europeans who chose to stay in Latin America. And then the final group were the mestizos, which were people of European and Indian descent. One more group, too, that you could add to this were the mulattoes, which were Europeans and African descent. Now, due to Napoleon's conquest in Europe, which you guys had this on your hyperdoc, you had to answer that question about Napoleon. Spain and Portugal became very weak because Napoleon conquered them, and due to that weakness, that's what is going to free up these revolutions, because Spain and Portugal controlled the most land in Latin America. The first revolution that's going to take place in Latin America is in Haiti. It was the first independence movement. And over to the right, you see a picture of the leader of that movement. His name is Francois Dominique Toussaint Louverture. He leads a slave revolt in the French colony of Saint Dominique, which is actually the islands of Haiti and the Dominican Republic today. In 1804, Haiti becomes its own country, freeing itself from the French, and it becomes known as the Republic of Haiti. In Mexico, the first revolutionary movement in Mexico is going to be led by the guy you see here in this picture. He is a Catholic monk. His name is Miguel Hidalgo. He would lead this revolution in 1810. It would fail because a lot of people were afraid of the Spanish at this point, but it opened the eyes of many of the people in Mexico. And by 1821, Mexico had declared itself independent of Spain, and they became their own country. In South America, we get two guys that we need to talk about. Simon Bolivar. Of course, he's regarded as the George Washington of Latin America or of South America. In 1810, he helps free a couple of countries, Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. The other liberator of South America was Jose de San Martin. In 1810, he helps free Argentina. 1817, Chile. In 1824, the country of Peru. Now, as these independence movements began to grow, a lot of these countries wanted recognition. Brazil would actually gain its independence from Portugal in 1822. By 1838, almost all of Central and South America was independent of European rule. So eventually they'd run all these European countries out. The European response was to really, they really didn't want to get involved. Some countries did. Britain did not. Of course, Britain supported the idea of independence. The group, the Concert of Europe, which we talked about earlier, did want to intervene for fear of losing those colonies and upsetting the balance in Europe as well. The American response was to issue a document known as the Monroe Doctrine, which you guys did in the Hyperdoc. The Monroe Doctrine guaranteed that the United States would support any Latin American country that wanted independence, and it would also forbid Europeans to come into those countries and try to recolonize. Once these countries became, or once these Latin American colonies became new countries, they're going to have problems. They are going to lose a lot of people during these independence wars naturally. There's going to be a problem with trying to figure out where these countries are going to be broken up into. So there were a lot of border disputes. They didn't have a lot of infrastructure. Again, roads and bridges, railroads and other things were not there at that point. So they had to build their infrastructure from the ground up. And they had to deal with the problem of a group of strongmen known as the caudillos. I had you guys look up a couple of those guys like Santa Anna, who pretty much ruled through military rule, basically. The economy was mainly based on exports, meaning that everything that they grew or did went out of the country. They didn't have anything really to make of their own that they could actually get their economy to grow. The United States and Great Britain played major roles in Latin America after these revolutions, and they had a heavy impact on these countries even after they became independent. There was a lot of social inequality, mainly two-class structure, really, after these independence movements, the very, very rich and the extremely poor. One idea that's going to change things in Latin America is the introduction of the Panama Canal. President Theodore Roosevelt saw a canal through Panama as vital to American interest. Just to briefly go back, the Panama Canal originally was started by the French. They gave up on the idea. Roosevelt is going to pick it up, and eventually he's going to see it through and get it built. The United States would help build this Panama Canal. In 1903, Panama was part of Colombia. The problem with that was that Colombia did not want to allow the United States to have this canal built. So the United States is going to do something a little underhanded. If you look at this map, you can see Panama is right here, and the only way to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific was to sail all the way around South America and to the other side, which is a pretty long ways. The Panama Canal, when you cut through, you could go straight through and then into the Pacific Ocean. Again, another picture of Panama, which is an isthmus. So a body of land separating two bodies of water. Again, here's a picture. You can see that it was difficult to build. You guys looked up some of that stuff for me. They had to cut through mountains. They had to deal with different elevations. They had to deal with jungles. So a pretty difficult thing to construct. Theodore Roosevelt and the U.S. are going to support a revolution in Panama so that they can get freedom from Colombia. Once they do that, Panama is going to give them permission to build and lease the canal. The canal is going to cut almost 7,700 miles off of a trip by sea from New York to San Francisco, which we just looked at that route. That's going to be it. The next topic will be Asian resistance in China and Japan. We'll pick that up in the coming days. Hope you guys have a good one.